Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. The Names Not Numbers Oral History Film Documentary Project is remembering the stories of the Holocaust and is telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance. This unique project is in its 16th year. Over 2,500 survivors and 6,000 students have participated in it worldwide. The students were instructed by teachers and professionals. They learned interviewing techniques from journalists. They learned filming techniques and editing skills from documentary filmmakers. The students interviewed, filmed, and edited the 2-hour interviews with each survivor to make 20-minute oral histories that are compiled in the Names Not Numbers documentary at the school. You're about to view the documentary Names Not Numbers, a movie in the making. This film chronicles the students as they are being trained by the professionals and includes their reflections. In it is embedded approximately 10 minutes from each interview. This is the students' work. They're filmed and edited interviews. Through this project, our students are preserving history, and they are the witnesses to the witnesses.
People who deny it have no conscience.
It was horrible. People cried, people died.
So many people made amazing choices and had the courage to take action. There is goodness in people's hearts.
Hello, students. My name is Rabbi Dr. Mordechai Smolarsek, and I'm here on behalf of the Names Not Numbers program. I want to begin by thanking you all for being involved in this very, very important program. For many years after World War II, survivors did not want to tell their stories. They didn't want to remember. They didn't want to inflict pain and suffering on their children, and they kept quiet about it. But then, Israel captured one of the most notorious Holocaust criminals, one of the most notorious war criminals in history, Adolf Eichmann. And they brought him to trial in Yerushalayim. And during that trial, survivors were called on to testify against this evil man. And once they started testifying, and once the trial was televised to the entire world, and once they saw their fellow survivors talking, and they realized the importance of telling this story, then survivors all over the world began to talk to their children and to their families. And eventually, they talked in front of the cameras of the Shoah Foundation. They talked to students like you. They took trips back to Poland and back to the camps to tell their stories.
Today, 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, 31% of all Americans believe that 2 million or fewer Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Among young Americans, 66% of them could not identify Auschwitz as a concentration camp or death camp. But we have documentation. We have unique historical documents that preserve certain facets of life during the Holocaust in real time. Today, 80 years after the outbreak of World War II, and 75 years after the end of the Holocaust, the pasuk from Parashat Ha'azinu is more timely than ever. Zachor Yamot Olam. Remember the days of old. Sha'al avicha v'yagedcha. Ask your father, and he will tell you. This is the last generation that has the privilege to hear the survivors' testimonies firsthand. You are the direct beneficiaries to hear these firsthand testimonies.
It's the young generation, the children, the students, you, who have to engage in telling that story. And why you? Because you are the future. You're the future of our people. And if you forget what happened to us in the past, then we are doomed to repeat it.
When living history becomes a memory, it will be you, the students who participated in Names Not Numbers. Through your documentary, you will remember the days of old. Zachor Yemot Olam.
So what are you going to experience and what are you going to learn in the Names Not Numbers program? So on a technical level, you're going to learn how to conduct an interview. You will learn how to operate advanced filming equipment, cameras, sound, and you will learn how to edit a movie. And eventually you will produce a film that will serve as an incredible testimony.
The survivors and the students are telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance.
And I hope that through this program, you will continue to be those young people who grow into committed Jews who are committed to their communities and to Jewish continuity.
Our Names Not Numbers students are learning history, recording history, and preserving history through their work.
The Names Not Numbers program has become an essential part of our Holocaust education curriculum over the past 3 years. Led by our social studies teacher, Mr. Katzman, the program allows students to become the carriers of the memories of the survivors of the Holocaust. Hearing the stories from the survivors brings an awareness of the reality of another person's suffering. Learning firsthand from a survivor is a lesson that no student will ever forget and will be able to pass on to others throughout their lives. Our students walk away from the program changed and with the responsibility to assure that nothing like the Holocaust will ever happen again.
We're going to watch an interview that was conducted by previous Names Not Numbers students with a survivor named Moshe Avital. And when we're watching this video, I want you to just take it in, take note of his story, take note of his emotions, how he tells the story, because this is an example of a survivor, and it's a good preview of some stuff you might encounter during your interview.
I decided to do Names Not Numbers to make a change in the world. Because soon, the Holocaust survivors won't be alive anymore, and there won't be anyone to tell their stories.
Because if we don't keep talking about it, people are going to forget.
As one of the last generations to be able to speak to Holocaust survivors, I think it's extremely important to share their story to as many people as we can.
I think we should be able to carry on the story to the next generation.
I think Names Not Numbers means that each person throughout the Holocaust was very important. They each had their own story and their own background, and they each deserve to be recognized by their name.
When you're referred to as a number, you're not a person, you're just nothing. And with a name, you're an individual, you have a life, you have a story, you've lived.
In the camps, the Jews were dehumanized. They weren't considered humans, and they called them by their numbers. So saying names, not numbers, is saying, no, these were humans. This is what happened to 6 million people, not numbers. The name of the journalist that we learned from was Morgan Reiner, and she taught us a few techniques on how to speak during the interview.
I am a reporter in Southwest Florida. Most of the time, I do cover politics, but I cover any big news of the day.
She taught us to not start off just how was the Holocaust, but to lead up to that question, because for most survivors, it's a very difficult and hard question to just be asked and to answer.
You never want to start off a story or talking to anyone in an intense way. When you do that, you turn them off from you, you make them uncomfortable, they put up a barrier that's gonna make it even harder to break down later on. Make them feel like you're at a coffee table, sipping coffee, talking to them like you would any other friend. And then you can get into the more serious reason as to why you guys are talking. The best thing you can do is listen. If they say something that sticks out to you, follow up with it. You want to know as much about this person before you sit down with them. It will help you understand them, it'll help you with your questions, and it'll help with follow-up questions.
When someone's crying or getting emotional, you should give them a second and wait for later to talk.
If someone stops talking and they're emotional, which will most likely happen with what you're doing, it's okay to sit there and let them breathe. Sometimes the moment of silence can be the loudest part of your story.
What is your favorite part of interviewing someone?
I want to be a reporter because, like I said, I uncover the truth, but also because I get to meet a million cool people like yourself when I'm out in the field talking to you.
Would you have any suggestions or tips for anybody else who's an aspiring journalist or wants to do what you do when they get older?
Read the newspapers every morning. That is my biggest tip to anyone, and it's the advice that I got from a lot of people. You need to know news in and out. You need to know local, state, national news as well. It helps you in your everyday life to know what's going on around you and to be able to talk to other people about it as well.
We had classes on how to use cameras, how to focus camera, how to zoom a camera, how you want it to look, the different perspectives.
Usually we have a medium shot of the survivor, which is from the waist up. And then the other one, usually this one has the medium shot. And then we have another camera that's set on this side that has a close-up of the survivor.
With Lou, I learned that this first ring is to make the shot more focused. And the second one is to zoom in or to zoom out. And then the expanded focus helps get the focus right. We prepared for this interview by having many classes about the backstory of how the Holocaust began. And then once we were finished with those lessons, we looked at our survivor's biography and we formed questions. So far, to prepare for my interview, I've learned a lot about my survivor. We've learned about the background story and before the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, and just about her life.
I'm feeling really good and I'm excited to get to be able to interview some survivors for the first time in my life.
I'm feeling a little nervous to be asking those questions because I know it's really difficult for people to answer them.
I'm nervous that the Holocaust survivors, it's a very sensitive topic for them, but knowing that it's for the greater good to share it with people is something that makes me feel a bit better.
Today we're going to be interviewing my great-grandfather, Henry Wertheimer.
I'm interviewing my great-grandmother, Peril Krieger. Shelley Levy.
My name is Peril Krieger.
When were you born?
December 15, 1927. Trebuchani. My father is Abraham and my mother Basio. My mother had 12 children. Twice a year or 3 times they went on vacation. We had a Jewish girl taking care of my house and a Gentile for tough work, for laundry and washing the floor. And the Jewish woman used to cook and take care of the children. Yontif, I still wanted to go back to see my father, the 7 sons, dressed Shabbos. Shabbos, everybody changed. We didn't have high school. We had to travel this train to high school. But we had Sunday school to learn a little about Jewish history.
My name is Shelley Levy. I was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. We had a very large family. I had a brother, only one brother. He was older than me. Unfortunately, he passed away very young. My father had a business. He manufactured penknives and scissors. And my grandfather was the owner of a bank, of the Colonialna Banca. So basically, the family was affluent, and we lived a very comfortable, very nice life.
My name is Henrik Wertheimer. I was born April 10th, 1927. Father was a wine taster. That was his profession. My mother didn't work. I have one sister who lives in New Jersey. Before the war in Germany, we led a very good life. We were not very rich, but we were definitely good life. The Shabbos was the same, because we were Shabbos. We went to shul. We had about a 20-minute walk to go to shul. We had a Friday night meal, and of course Shabbos lunch, and the same you would do here now. I went to Hebrew day school. I went 1 year in Mainz and 1 year in Frankfurt. My life was very uneventful, thank God. When the war started, we had the sirens going at night sometimes, and then we would have to go down to the subway to be safe, because they didn't have shelters in each building. You had to go to the subway. So that was a little, well, certainly it wasn't pleasant, but we had to spend a lot of time there. But there was no bombing, so it was just to prepare the people in case of bombing, but it was never happened.
My mother begged my father, please take every child Irish papers, no Jewish paper. You are not Jewish. Get papers, different names, and you're not Jewish. That's the only way your children will survive. My father said, nothing will happen. Everything will fall in place.
My parents left because of what went on in Germany, and they went to France because my late father's family was originally, had relatives yet in France. So that was probably a natural place to go. In France, schools don't have school on Thursday, and they have school on Saturday. So my teacher noticed that I didn't do so well in mathematics, and she suggested that maybe I should come to school on Shabbat, but not write. And that's what I did, and then I became a very good student. We left Paris before the Germans invaded, because they were, not far away. My mother was part of a convoy of refugees on the open talk, and we were on the open talk south, and we actually met somehow. I don't remember how. We found our grandparents in a little town, and we spent a few days there. And then we found out where my father was working for the army, and we were able to be reunited. We rented a small apartment, and my father could even come home. At first, he could come at night from where he was. That was a pretty good life. I mean, for the way I remember it, it was eventful, but it was pleasant. So that was in the spring of 1940.
Even from Trevisan, the people made a list who they will first kill. My father was on the line name as from my relatives. I was hiding my family, by Esther's cousin, my sister-in-law, in their house. All of a sudden, SS came to the house. I ran in the garden, and I was hiding under the trees. And I know, God, here I am, I can't do nothing. Can't help. God can only save me.
At age 4, we started running, and we didn't have a normal life anymore. We left our home, our beautiful home in Belgrade, in the middle of the night, just 3 days before the bombardment of Belgrade, with a small suitcase into the unknown. My father was not there. We were a group of 10 people, and we all left together, and we all were lucky enough to survive.
The minute the war started, my father was not home anymore. And as a matter of fact, for my bar mitzvah, he couldn't attend my bar mitzvah. He had to go to that auxiliary army. He worked for the French army, but he was not in the army as such. When the Germans came, he wanted like the French army or whoever. They were in southern France, and that's where he then was stationed. And we found out somehow, I don't know how, but we found out where he was, and we joined him in the same area. We took an apartment, and he was able to come home in the evening. But he was not a prisoner. He was free to do what he wanted to do, but he had to show up every day to do that auxiliary work for the army. His group was taken or was transported to another camp, and he was able to come home at times, not frequently. And I remember the last time I saw him, which was in 1943. He came, and then when he left, I took him to the railroad station, and I said, "Dad, why do you have to go back? Why don't you stay?" So he said, "If I don't go back, 10 others will be deported to East." They didn't know about where. And unfortunately, that's the last time I saw him.
The big fence separated the ghetto and the Gentile. They were free. So every morning, my sister went to the fence, because the other side of the fence were Goyim Gentiles. And they said, "Are you hungry? Do you want food?" Sure, she cried. "We have nothing more to eat, and the little children are starving." So they said, "If you have jewelry, earrings, necklaces, bracelets, any jewelry, you give me one kind of jewelry. Whatever you want, I bring you farina for the kids." You gave a necklace with a little diamond. She gave you food for the babies.
We were running, trying to get to the coast of Yugoslavia. Hitler attacked Yugoslavia with a bombardment, with a surprise bombardment of Belgrade. We started taking the trains and the horse buggies or whatever transportation we could find. And it took us about 2 months to get to Split. My father was there already, waiting for us.
They took us on trains. We lost my little brother. We didn't know where. But it was horrible. Trains day and night. I think we traveled like 8 days. People cried. People died. People jumped out the train by a stop and we came to Auschwitz. The head was shaved. There were Jewish boys in striped uniforms.
At that point, the only solution was to go away and be separate from my mother and my sister with false papers. So I was a non-Jewish farm helper, and he never knew that I was Jewish. And of course, I was not even 17 years old at the time. It was difficult, because I couldn't communicate with anybody, and I had to keep the things to myself. The farmer had, I think, 2 daughters, and one of them was married. And that man told me once that he was a son-in-law. He said once, if I ever get a Jew, I'll kill him. So of course, I couldn't answer. He didn't know I was Jewish. But the farmer himself and his wife were very nice to me and treated me well. The son-in-law treated me well too. It's just that if he had known that I was Jewish, it would have been, it would have been the end of it somehow.
Korčula is an island not too far from Split. And the reason we went from Split to Korčula, because Split was already totally overcrowded by refugees. We understood that the Germans were approaching to Korčula and to Split. We knew, or we hoped, that we would be safer in Italy. So we arranged, my father, of course, arranged for a ferry boat to take us to Italy, to Trieste. We did stay in a small village called Bardi. When we arrived to the town of Bardi, the whole town was outside waiting for our buses because they wanted to see the Jews. They had never seen Jews in their lives. And according to their idea or understanding, we, the Jews, have horns. When we started getting out of the buses and the townspeople started looking at us, they would just be amazed and marveled. Wow, they look just like us, the Christians. They were very, very kind, very helpful, very welcoming. And there we were safe.
It was 32 barracks. Our barrack didn't have bed, no anything. The rows, you had to line up 5 naked. We got a notice that they take us away from Auschwitz. I had like this, my hand infection. So we made up. In the middle of the camp was a truck open, covered with black. So you had to have a clean body. My hand was all small. Now you go by single. One side was Mengele, but you here had to close, here you're naked, and you have to turn like this. So I was sure they take me in the truck. In truck meant to the gas chamber. Then I came at the door, and Mengele here, Here a lady doctor, I turned, all of a sudden came a noise. Say, look, here, there, like that, watch. And I went in. The cop was on. She said, what's with your hand? How did you pass that? Not possible. Nobody passes with a pimple. And you with such an infection. God passed me. Only God.
At one point, the government of Mussolini fell, and Mussolini was killed. And so the Nazis invaded Italy within 24 hours. At that time, we had a neighbor. Her name was Maria. And she knew of some smugglers who smuggled merchandise into Switzerland. And these smugglers were already taking people into Switzerland. And so she came with us, and that I remember, I start remembering a little bit that I would cry because my legs would hurt of so much walking. And so my father would say to me, just a little more. And sometimes he would carry me, and sometimes, and my uncle would carry me. And so my father would say, just a little more. Whenever we get into Switzerland, I'll buy you all the chocolate. We got to the border of Switzerland, and it was a very tough time. Until now, the family group was together. We, the children, were not able to stay with our parents. So we were sent to live with the Swiss family.
They took us to Stutthof. From Stutthof, German ladies came to take us from Stutthof to work for them. We all had 3 sisters, and we begged, take us all 3. So she took us all 3 for work. There we were 2 months. We got good food. Then it was the march. We had to line up and just walk. Snow, water. People fell. One day, somebody came over, a soldier, and gives me a blanket, rolled in blanket. I should carry it for him. And he gave me a bread. A bread was 5 pieces. He gave me a bread. Who gets a bread? One night, he stopped us in a bar. The Germans hid for winter vegetables, carrots, and beets. What a simcha!
My brother and I were placed into 2 different families, Swiss families, in a small village by the name of Grüsch. The family that I lived with, they had 5 or 6 children. They were kind to us. They treated us fairly. The same rules that apply to their kids apply to us. We encountered so much goodness, and within all this chaos and with all this suffering, we really encountered the best in people.
Nobody knew where I was, right? And I couldn't make myself known. So there was no communication. The only thing I knew or heard is from the farmer who had a radio, and listened to the British news, which he was not allowed to do, but he did. So when he listened to the news, I heard the news as well. When I heard that Paris was taken by the Allies, I was exhilarated, to put it mildly. Then I packed up and hitchhiked home. Nobody knew that I left in the middle of the night, and the farmers didn't know that I had gone there probably, and they never found out that I was Jewish. But they saved my life. My mother and sister stayed in the same apartment, the same town during the whole time. I wasn't hiding. But of course, I had no idea they did. And when I came back and I found them there, I was delighted. They were delighted to see me. I didn't know what happened to them until the day I came home.
From the barn, as Russian liberated, Russian said, do what you want. You can go in the houses, take what you want, because the German fleet, they left the houses.
The reunion with my parents was very emotional on one hand, but on the other hand, very painful, because we had been living already for 2 years with this family. Their last name was Gruber. And we had grown so attached to them. They had become our family. It was a bittersweet event.
I worked as a car mechanic locally. I learned the trade. We had a small shul. We had a minyan, and I learned how to lane and how to down from the Omid and all that. I took Hebrew lessons from a dentist who had smicha. We stayed there till we were able to go to America.
My father wanted a yeshiva, so I had boys, doctors, lawyers. Can't. Daddy worked hard to raise daughters to get little boys. So I said, well, it's only me. I have to do something for my parents. So I won't love him so much, but he's very fine. He's learned and he loved me. I got married, given to friends, and there was a yeshiva. I was 18, 19. I wanted to go back to school, be somebody. But soon enough, I had a baby.
We couldn't go back to Yugoslavia because at that time, communism was in place. My parents decided to go back to Italy, but this time to Milan. Everybody was struggling to make enough for a piece of bread. My father started working, selling watches. We stayed for about 5 years in Milan. Rumors started that communism was going to take over the whole of Europe. And so people started moving and leaving Italy and going to America. And we were supposed to come here to the United States. And then, for whatever reason, my father decided not to. First, we got to Argentina. My father found a good business opportunity in Colombia, where basically I lived for about 16 years. I did go back to Belgrade for the first time about 12 years ago. It was a very interesting and emotional trip.
They took us a beautiful fancy ship, Saturnia, the name of the ship. It was a fancy ship, but brave. I ate chocolate. The American gave us chocolate.
I went on Liberty ship, which took 2 weeks. The whole family was in America, and my uncle got us a visa to come in America just before Pesach 1946. We arrived in America, and my uncles sent me a telegram before we arrived that because we arrived on Shabbos, they could stay on the ship till Shabbat would end, and that somebody would pick me up. My future brother-in-law picked me up on Motzei Shabbos, and drove from Staten Island, and I saw the George Washington Bridge, noticed the bridge and the beautiful lights. When I came to America, I stayed with my family, close family in New York. Well, that's where we settled. We got an apartment from my late father-in-law. Very happy after that.
If you had a message to give to my generation, what would you say?
Pray. 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 If I don't believe, I'm forgotten what's all about. I'm nothing.
You have to strive to never give up. You have to keep on going. The Holocaust survivors, they had so many difficulties they had to face, but they kept on going, and taking that lesson with us, we can apply it to our daily lives.
My message to your generation, keep informed of what's going on in the Jewish world. That's very important. And who is our friend and who is not our friend.
We have to spread what happened so that people know what could happen, and they can help make sure that it doesn't happen again.
People who deny it have no conscience, So first of all, they have no proof of why it doesn't exist. The fact that so many survivors are there to talk about it.
To combat Holocaust denial, we have to keep learning about the survivors like we're doing in this program.
We should prove to them common sense, show them what happened, how much Jews are killed. And when we talk about Jews are killed, point to that number. And if you can't say that's all a coincidence.
What message do you have to my generation?
As you can see, all along our journey, while we were on the run or in hiding from the Nazis, so many people, ordinary people, just like you and me, made amazing choices and had the courage to take action that basically saved our lives. They did it out of the goodness of their hearts and just because it was the right thing to do.
My message is to stand up in what you believe in, no matter what everyone else is saying, no matter if you're the minority or the majority.
To know that ultimately there is goodness in the world, regardless of the suffering. There is goodness in people's hearts.
It was a really special opportunity to be able to interview a Holocaust survivor. My great-grandmother is a Holocaust survivor, and she doesn't really talk about her story. And I think my great-grandmother will be happy knowing that I had the opportunity to interview a Holocaust survivor, because even though she doesn't talk about her story, I feel like she would still like to know that her great-grandson is still speaking about the Holocaust and learning about it. And I think she would be happy to know that there are other people from my generation that are still learning about the Holocaust.
I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to do this interview. I am a descendant of Holocaust survivors, and in my family, my great-grandmother, she does not really like to speak so much about the Holocaust because it's a very traumatic experience for her. So just the fact that I was able to do it, and now that I get to have this documentary, is very meaningful and very special.
It was a really good experience to learn more about the Holocaust than I knew before.
I would tell other kids who would like to do names, not numbers in the future that they should, because it's
really important to remember all the lives of the survivors and people who unfortunately did not survive in the Holocaust. Learning about it really keeps it alive.
I would recommend Names Not Numbers because I think it's an amazing opportunity and it's very special to learn about a survivor's story.
It's a great experience that you are able to talk to survivors and really get to know their story so we can pass it on and so no one ever forgets the Holocaust.
In future generations, some children may not even get the chance to meet Holocaust survivors, so it's good for other people to learn their stories because then you can share it with the next generation and keep their stories going on and on.
Yes, it is extra work. It is extra homework. It is extra assignments that you need to fill out, but it's assignments that you're going to take on with you forever. The experience of talking to a Holocaust survivor is something that not everyone gets the opportunity to do. So if you do have the opportunity, you should 100% go and take it. I think it's very special that even with this pandemic going on, that Henry still used his time to come here just to tell us about his story.
Knowing that I'm one of the last generations to be able to do this is really a gift.
It's important that since we have the opportunity to learn about it and talk to these survivors, that we take these stories on, teach future generations, and educate people on things they might have not known.
I think that's why we're doing all this whole program, so that in the future we can tell our children who could tell future generations, so that we keep the story alive.